Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, U.S. public pensions pouring over $60 billion into China. But some states are rolling out laws to buck the trend. Some Chinese companies are putting on American shells after U.S. regulators accuse them of aiding Beijing. Experts say one goal is to keep their U.S. operations running, and some say allowing them to expose loopholes in U.S. enforcement. Top officials warn there more sanctions on China are coming from both the U.S. and NATO. This as concerns loom over China's support for Russia's war in Ukraine.
There isn't a clear sense that any new sanctions on China, which for the most part is able to plausibly claim that it is adhering to the letter of the sanctions, if not the spirit of the sanctions, is going to do any great damage to U.S. efforts against Russia.
And U.S. officials say they arrested a Chinese national for allegedly running the largest ever malware network. The botnet believed to have stolen billions from COVID-19 relief funds. Are Chinese companies playing cat and mouse with Washington to evade sanctions? Media reports show several companies the U.S. government has a close eye on are falling into this category, ranging from a biotech group to LiDAR and drone makers. More about how they try to make it look like they're distanced from China. Let's dive in.
Caught, rebrand, repeat. This cycle has become a common playbook for several Chinese companies restricted by the U.S. government. That's to dodge sanctions and keep their U.S. operations running. According to a report from the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, a new company registered in Michigan last December named American LiDAR. It was found to have a Chinese owner. That's China-based LiDAR maker Hesai Group. The U.S. added the company to its blacklist early this year, citing security concerns. The Pentagon is banned from recruiting its services, and other U.S. entities receive warnings before entering into contracts with it. Hesai sued the U.S. government this May, denying all allegations. Hesai makes almost half of the world's LiDAR. The device helps self-driving cars create 3D maps of the road. Some U.S. lawmakers warned that the technology could collect data on American drivers and share those details with Beijing. American LiDAR failed to report its connection with Hesai when registering in the U.S., and its new home in Michigan is close to 3 big U.S. automakers. An expert said Chinese companies can't refuse Beijing's requests under Chinese law, especially when it comes to their databases. If the U.S. government doesn't protect this data from Beijing, American core interests and security are in imminent danger. It's just one of many cases. Chinese biotech firm BGI recently rebranded its Massachusetts affiliate. The world's top drone maker, DJI, is selling its products through an American startup in the U.S. And Chinese telecom giant Huawei has been found to sponsor top U.S. institutes for research through a Washington-based group. All 3 of these companies have been accused or blacklisted for their ties with the Chinese military. Here's the tricky part. U.S. lawyers say Chinese companies have the right to shift production or rebrand as American. So seizing the questionable Chinese companies more effectively will continue to present a challenge for U.S. regulators.
A new trend in U.S.-China decoupling. More U.S. states are pushing their public pension funds to stop investing in China. Earlier this month, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill into law. It requires the Sunshine State to stop investing in companies controlled by the Chinese regime. The law also requires the state to divest current holdings in China. Posting on X, DeSantis said the move was to keep China out of his state. The Florida State Pension oversees $250 billion in assets. About 0.16% of that total is exposed to China. It plans to divest those assets in 2 years. Moving north, Illinois, Kansas, Missouri, and New Jersey are also pushing bills to divest state pension funds from China. Indiana is already on it. Last year, it pulled over $500 million in investments exposed to China. The state is in the process of divesting the remaining $40 million. Not all states are on board. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs struck down a bill to divest from China last month. That's over concerns about economic growth. The flurry of bills comes after a major shift last November, when America's largest contribution pension plan decided to exclude investments from Hong Kong and China starting in 2024. It's called the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. The pension fund is reserved for U.S. government staff. The agency has over $700 billion in assets under its belt, and it manages retirement savings account for almost 7 million federal employees. Zooming out, U.S. public pension funds have invested over $68 billion in China since 2020, according to a report from Future Union. These investments are made by over 70 of the largest public pension funds in the U.S. The largest investor among them was New York State Common Retirement Fund, which invested over $8 billion in China. Up next is California and its public employees retirement system. It has poured over $7 billion into China. The California State Teachers Retirement System is trailing behind, investing over $5.5 billion in the country. Then comes the Washington State Investment Board, which invested over $5 billion in China. A matter of utmost urgency. That's what a U.S. official said about China's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. During a trip to Brussels, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell warned there will be more sanctions on China from the U.S. and NATO. Campbell said China is backing Russia's defense industry with weapons and technology. Those include artilleries, drones, long-range missiles, and Russia's ability to track activities on the battlefield. He added that Beijing's efforts made Moscow a strategic challenge not only to Ukraine, but to others in Europe. Last month, the U.S. imposed sanctions on more than a dozen firms in China for supplying military gear to Russia's war in Ukraine. Campbell said he already briefed NATO about China's aggression and is expecting more collective action from members of the bloc. To talk more about Washington's new sanction warning on China over its support for Russia, we sat down with John Sidelides, former U.S. State Department diplomacy consultant and geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors, for insight. John Sidelides, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the U.S. is warning Beijing over its support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, saying that Beijing could face further sanctions from the U.S. as well as NATO. Now, what is the scale of these likely sanctions? How likely are we to see something similar to what the West slapped on Russia?
It's a very important question that you ask, and there's no sense right now that it'll be anything on the scale of Russia, simply because, for the first reason, the U.S. and Chinese economies are so heavily interdependent and interlinked that any major damage to the Chinese economy, even if the sanctions might be able to accomplish that, and there's a question in and of itself there, would of course redound to economic misery in the United States. And I don't want to say necessarily that it's a distraction from the problems that we face in Ukraine, but there isn't a clear sense that any new sanctions on China, which for the most part is able to plausibly claim that it is adhering to the letter of the sanctions, if not the spirit of the sanctions, is going to do any great damage to U.S. efforts against Russia. So it's very difficult to ascertain what the immediate motivation here is, except to try to shore up what is an increasingly fragile Ukraine policy in Washington.
On that note, a piece in the Wall Street Journal is noting how U.S. sanctions have inadvertently created an axis of evasion led by China, saying the bloc of sanctioned nations collectively now have this economy of scale to shield them from Washington's financial warfare. We're seeing them trade everything from drones to missiles to gold and oil. On that note, why haven't these sanctions had the intended effect?
They can have minimal impact, but especially on countries that are weaker economies that are much more dependent on the United States, on the U.S. and Western-led currency exchange system and foreign exchange systems. But when you're dealing again with a country the size of Russia, which again is the 10th or 11th largest economy in the world, it's not only an energy exporting superpower, but it is a commodity superpower. It is engaged in closer trade ties to China, which now has essentially doubled its trade ties with Russia over the last several years. but also most countries in what we call politely in Washington, the global south, retain very strong trade ties with Russia. They want no part of the U.S. and European sanctions against Moscow. And it's very difficult to effectively wield sanctions against such a large and powerful economy that is so deeply embedded in what is becoming increasingly, it seems, an almost bifurcated global energy market.
Expanding on that, we've also seen communist China helping countries like Russia, but also Iran, especially what we're seeing with Hamas in that war against Israel there. Given all of that, what is the solution here if sanctions aren't having the intended effect?
With China especially, we're increasingly concerned about not only violations of its citizens' human rights and labor standards and environmental standards, but obviously violations of international law and international treaties vis-a-vis Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, and a number of ASEAN countries around the South China Sea region. And it seems to me that more effective approach would be, first of all, military deterrence in order to be able to put guardrails around those countries. But also the fact that, for instance, China has been in the World Trade Organization since 2001, operating with near impunity, even though it has violated almost all of the compliance criteria of WTO membership. And there's been no serious effort to either remove China from the WTO or for Washington to rescind the permanent most favored trading nation status with China, to demonstrate to China and to Russia and to other countries that the U.S. is less concerned about being loved and respected and more about being feared, where we can wield these tools in a very realistic and credible manner.
John Sidelides, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks again for having me.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping is opening a summit with heads of Arab states in Beijing. The Thursday gathering comes as the communist regime seeks to expand diplomacy and businesses in the region.
This meeting comes in light of what is happening in the region, in the Middle East, from escalated tensions as a result of the continuation of the war in the Gaza Strip and the difficult humanitarian situation it is causing for its residents.
The summit was attended by leaders from the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, and Tunisia, among others. According to Chinese state-run news outlets, Xi reiterated calls for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state, a position closely aligned with Arab nations. Beijing has long denounced Israel over its ongoing military operation in Gaza, but has yet to criticize Hamas's terrorist attack on October 7th. Aside from conflicts in the Middle East, Xi also urged Arab leaders to ramp up cooperation in areas like trade, clean energy, space, and healthcare. Experts say China is developing soft power in the Middle East, especially as Washington remains a major security partner in the region. The U.S. has several military bases in nations like Bahrain and supplies them with defense technology. China renewing its long-standing threat to attack Taiwan with a chilling declaration from its defense ministry on Thursday. That's just a week after Taiwan's new president, William Lai, took office. Watch.
Taiwan's independence means war, and division brings no peace. The Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, is fully prepared and stays highly vigilant. We will take resolute actions to smash any Taiwan independent separatist attempts and thwart any foreign interference.
The ministry adds Beijing hopes to maintain high-level communications between China and the U.S. The Chinese Communist Party sees the island as part of China and a core interest, though it has never ruled the island. William Lai, Taiwan's newly elected president, urged Beijing to stop threatening Taiwan and insisted on Taiwanese independence during his inauguration speech last Monday. Lai's speech angered Beijing. It sent dozens of its warplanes and warships to surround the island. U.S. lawmakers and senior officials have repeatedly warned that a Beijing invasion of Taiwan would be devastating for the U.S. and the world. The Justice Department has announced the arrest of an alleged Chinese cybercrime ringleader after a major COVID fraud bust. Prosecutors say the criminal network used a botnet, infecting over 600,000 IP addresses in the U.S. Authorities say fraudsters submitted thousands of fake applications for federal relief during the COVID-19 pandemic. An FBI official told reporters that law enforcement seized roughly $4 million worth of luxury items and $30 million in real estate. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more on the alleged scheme.
The Justice Department said Wednesday authorities in Singapore had arrested 35-year-old Yunhee Wang. Prosecutors accused the Chinese national of leading a criminal network and spreading malicious code through virtual private networking, infecting 19 million different IP addresses worldwide. IP addresses are unique numbers assigned to individual devices on the internet. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland says that targeted IPs included over 600,000 in the U.S.
He then made more than $99 million, selling cybercriminals access to his network of hijacked devices.
The Departments of Justice and Treasury say Wang and others used a vast network of infected computers, known as a botnet, to submit fake federal relief applications during the COVID pandemic. The departments say the network was also used to carry out bomb threats and send child exploitation materials online, among other schemes. The cyber criminal conduct led to a loss of around $5.9 billion. The DOJ says authorities in Singapore and Thailand worked with the FBI on the bust. A senior FBI official told reporters authorities seized about $4 million worth of watches, sports cars and other luxury assets, and $30 million in real estate properties across East Asia, the Middle East, Caribbean, and the U.S. The indictment says Wang used money he earned from the botnet to buy properties. The FBI official said the government is pursuing Wang's extradition to the U.S. He says an investigation into other potential suspects is ongoing. The new charges are only the latest example of alleged fraud, rampant in the U.S. since COVID-19 struck more than 4 years ago. The IRS said in March it had investigated COVID-19 related tax fraud and money laundering cases, potentially worth $9 billion. More than half were from cases opened in the last year. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Coming up, a major blow to democracy in Hong Kong. 14 dissidents are facing life in prison after a court convicted them of subversion under a law imposed by the Chinese regime. Well, on the verdicts. One of the world's top accounting firms is in hot water. Media reports that Beijing is weighing record penalties over auditing work for China's troubled property developer Evergrande. And Beijing rolling out new rules on flashy displays of wealth. Discover how rich Chinese influencers are finding their social media empires on a chopping block. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A court in Hong Kong found 14 pro-democracy activists and politicians guilty of subversion Thursday under a Chinese regime-imposed law. The 14 dissidents face up to life in prison in the largest single prosecution under the law since it took effect in 2020. Critics say it's another blow to the city's rule of law and its reputation as a global financial hub. Here's more.
Security was tight as diplomats entered the High Court for the verdicts. Some supporters of the accused even queued overnight. The verdicts in Hong Kong's biggest trial against the Democratic opposition come 3 years after police arrested 47 Democrats in dawn raids across the city. They were charged with conspiracy to commit subversion under a national security law imposed by China. Accused of a plot to paralyse government in the former British colony and force the city's leader to resign through a pre-selection ballot in a July 2020 citywide election. The Democrats maintain it was an unofficial attempt to select the strongest candidates in a bid to win a historic majority in Hong Kong's legislature. Acquitted barrister Lawrence Lau spoke outside court.
Well, I won't say this case is finished because further proceedings is going on. I'm unable to say too much. Do bear with me. Thank you very much for the concern over all the defendants of this case.
Social worker Lee Yue-shun, who was also acquitted, told reporters he was feeling calm despite an expected appeal by prosecutors. The judges extended bail for those two and tentatively adjourned the case until June 25th, when those convicted are able to make mitigating arguments before final sentencing. In 2020, Beijing imposed the sweeping national security law, which saw arrests of Democratic campaigners and the closure of liberal media outlets and NGOs. The US and other countries have criticised the trial as politically motivated, calling for the accused to be immediately released. 31 defendants pleaded guilty and 4 of them have become prosecution witnesses. Sentencing for those found guilty will come later, with prison terms ranging from 3 years to life.
One of the world's top accounting firms could face harsh scrutiny from Beijing. Bloomberg reports that China's Ministry of Finance may announce penalties against PricewaterhouseCoopers over its auditing work for China's Evergrande Group. Bloomberg's report Thursday cited sources who asked not to be identified. China is looking to slap a record fine on PwC, the equivalent of more than $130 million. And it's considering shutting down some of the company's China-based operations. The sources said the country's Ministry of Finance may announce the penalties as early as this week, and the final decision might vary. Hengda is the main unit of China's second-largest developer, Evergrande. Chinese authorities accused Hengda of overstating its revenue from 2018 to 2020 by nearly $78 billion. PwC's Shanghai branch was Hengda's auditor during that period. If Beijing's penalties become reality, it would be yet another blow to the global accounting leader. PwC has lost more than a dozen Chinese clients over the past 2 years. Beijing is saying no to conspicuous flaunting of wealth on social media, and wealthy Chinese social media influencers are getting their online accounts banned. NTD's Sean Marshall has more.
No more showing off allowed for the wealthy class in China. The CCP is banning extravagant social media influencers that like to showcase their fancy cars, pricey clothes, and luxurious mansions. One of the most popular influencers is someone known as the Kim Kardashian of Chinese social media. Wang Hongquanqing had a social media account of over 4 million followers taken down. Wang is said to never go out unless he is wearing an outfit and jewels worth at least $1.4 million. In April, the Cyberspace Administration of China said it would target influencers that are deliberately showcasing a lavish lifestyle built on wealth.
Digital governance, and digital governance, which essentially includes 3 things, AI, social media, or data more broadly, and very specifically crypto and digital assets. And historically, there has been regulation around crypto and digital assets in the last couple of years. Data always had regulation around privacy. It's gotten stronger.
Wang's Douyin account, the Chinese equivalent of TikTok, became inaccessible to his 4.3 million followers. Searches yielded an error message citing its blockage due to violations of Douyin's community guidelines. Chinese authorities have a history of regulating the internet, which is extensively censored in China to address social trends deemed undesirable. In 2022, officials introduced a code of conduct for live stream personalities, forbidding them from showcasing or excessively promoting luxury items, jewelry, cash, and other assets. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.